The genocide of the Rohingya Muslims at the hands of the Burmese government is one of the largest genocides in modern history. The brutal and genocidal mentality of the Burmese government can be traced back thousands of years. Tyrannical Buddhist dynasties had ruled the region that is now known as Burma for thousands of years. During the rule of the Burmese Empire, the Buddhist clergy were granted huge amounts of land and were exempt from taxation. The Buddhist monks would hoard wealth and claim that it was their God-given right to possess such stupendous fortunes, while the peasants were destined to starve and to serve them. Burmese society was strictly obedient to monks and would not question their status. Most Burmese people lived in poverty, while the Buddhist monks lived luxurious lives in their golden temples. The poor people in Burmese society accepted their class status and were promised that they would have riches when they were reincarnated in their next life. Religious minorities such as Muslims and Christians who refused to recognize the status quo were brutalized and massacred. The Muslims were the largest religious minority in the Burmese Empire. In the 1500s, during the reign of King Bayunyang, who was the king who expanded the Burmese Empire, thousands of Muslims were forced to convert to Buddhism, and those who refused to convert were killed. These forced conversions and massacres continued for centuries, and the Buddhist kings of Burma continued to brutalize the population. However, when the British conquered Burma in 1885, the Buddhist elite were stripped of their special privileges which they had enjoyed for thousands of years. During this period, religious minorities such as Muslims and Christians who had been oppressed for centuries took advantage of new opportunities and rose to high ranks within the new Burmese government. Minorities such as the Rohingya Muslims contributed to the development of education, science, and technology. This created a deep sense of jealousy within the backward Buddhist monks and the Burmese elites who had dominated Burmese politics for thousands of years. When Burma gained independence from British rule in 1948, Buddhist militias began to massacre Rohingya Muslims and attempted to regain the power and influence that they had once enjoyed during the Burmese Empire. A few years before the British left Burma, they had promised the Rohingya Muslims an independent state in the Arakan region, where they had lived for centuries. However, the British betrayed the Rohingya and did not fulfill this promise. Therefore, the Rohingya were forced to defend themselves and formed their own resistance group known as the Rohingya Mujahideen. The Rohingya Mujahideen fought many fierce battles against the Buddhist army but were eventually overpowered. Therefore, a delegation of Rohingya leaders traveled to Pakistan and appealed to Muhammad Ali Jinnah to integrate the Rohingya region into the newly formed state of Pakistan. However, this proposal was rejected as Pakistan did not want to interfere in Burmese affairs. As a result, Rohingyas were forced to live in the newly formed Buddhist-dominated Burmese state, where they would be marginalized and massacred. However, the Rohingya rebels continued to resist and received support from non-state groups in India and Pakistan, such as the Jamaat-e-Islami party, who supplied the Rohingya with money and weapons. The situation of the Rohingya Muslims became even worse after the military coup led by General Ne Win in 1962. General Ne Win expelled hundreds of thousands of Rohingya Muslims from Burma and officially stripped them of their citizenship. Therefore, the Rohingya were considered illegal immigrants. The Rohingya protested against this law and demanded their rights, but the Burmese government reacted with violence and massacred thousands of Rohingyas. Therefore, more than 200,000 Rohingyas fled to East Pakistan. However, the Rohingya Muslims refused to be humiliated. Armed resistance gained larger momentum in the early 1980s, with the formation of resistance groups such as the Rohingya Liberation Party, Rohingya Patriotic Front, Rohingya Solidarity Organization, and the Rohingya National Army. In 1988, General Ne Win was overthrown in a revolution. This revolution erupted all across Burma as a result of the poor economic situation and the mismanagement of the country's finances. The Rohingya Muslims saw this revolution as an opportunity to improve their situation. However, shortly after the revolution, they were completely ignored and were not included in the new government as they were still seen as outsiders. Initially, the new government held elections in order to gain the support of minority groups and deceived them into thinking that they actually care about their rights. However, the government later sidelined the Rohingyas and continued the policy of marginalizing non-Buddhist minorities. In 1989, the Rohingya lawyers and activists known as Kyoai Ong, Noor Ahmed, Luin Ibrahim, Fazal Ahmed, and Shamsul Anwarul Haq established a political party known as the National Democratic Party for Human Rights. This party was created for the purpose of representing the Rohingyas. In the 1990 elections, the party won 4 seats in the Burmese parliament. However, this party was later banned by the government and its members were banned from contesting in elections. Most members of the party fled the country. However, those who stayed behind were tortured and killed by the Burmese government. Therefore, the Rohingya lost hope in the political process and returned to fighting the government through armed resistance. However, the resistance was localized and it lacked international funding and support, which is why the Rohingyas continue to suffer and flee the country. The most recent Rohingya resistance group is the Arakan Rohingya Salvation Army, led by Ataullah Abu Ammar Jununi, who was born into a Rohingya refugee family that was forced to flee from Burma to Pakistan in the 1980s. After years of planning, Abu Ammar Jununi returned to Burma and began his resistance movement. On 25th August 2017, the Arakan Rohingya Salvation Army targeted 30 army checkpoints and killed 70 Burmese soldiers. In response to this attack, the Burmese army sent thousands of soldiers into Arakan and began a renewed genocide campaign. Massacres began all over the Arakan region, and 24,000 Rohingya people were killed. Around 354 Rohingya villages were burnt down and looted, and widespread rape was committed against Rohingya women. Since then, more than 1 million Rohingya refugees have migrated to Bangladesh. Buddhist monks in the Burmese government continue to openly call for the genocide of Muslims as the world turns a blind eye to the situation in Burma. The Rohingya genocide continues to be overlooked, and the Rohingya freedom fighters continue to defend themselves despite limited resources and support.
Kandeeshwar Musalman, Ashibasai Bollai Jan Foran. Arayar Kandeeshwar Musalman, Ashibasai Bollai Jan Foran. 100% Bala Faye, Ayo Mutun Gorham. 100% Bala Faye, Ayo Mutun Gorham.